You can find links to all our guests' books on the products page at creativityfound.co.uk. Just visit creativityfound.co.uk/products and books.
And you're not all that employable straight from university, it would turn out. You're kind of led to believe, aren't you, that you go to university to get a job, and then you leave university and it's like, okay. The ratios were all out of whack for me, basically. It was just a lot of admin and not a lot of creative. It enabled me to kind of pull together a lot of my interests and hobbies into one big-ass project of our wedding, basically. It allows me to sort of apply the skills that I learn in a more creative field, which is why my mantra is always, it's not wrong, it's different, because you can't actually do it wrong. It'll just be different, but like, isn't that what nature's like? You know, it's you can't. There's no right or wrong answer, and that's kind of what I like about the craft.
Hi, I'm Claire, founder of Open Stage Art's drama and singing classes for adults. For this podcast, I chat with people who have found or refound their creativity as adults. We'll explore their childhood experiences of the arts, discuss how they came to the artistic practices they now love, and consider the barriers they may have experienced between the two. We'll also explore what it is that people value and gain from their newfound artistic pursuits, and how their creative lives enrich their practical, necessary, everyday lives. For this episode, I'm speaking with Laura Reed, whose home crafting projects took on a whole new dimension when she made the flowers and other decorations for her own wedding. Hi Laura.
Hi Claire, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. You have left a stable full-time job and are working part-time as a freelance, while also designing and making bespoke decorations, teaching workshops, and writing a book on the subject. What is the creative discipline you are embracing?
My specialism is I'm a paper florist mostly, and then the freelance sort of job on the side is designing retail window displays.
Brilliant. Are you from a creative family, and was your education creatively influenced?
I would say I'm probably known as the arty one, in inverted commas, in my immediate family, but that's only from sort of a academic and job point of view. I think my family are all quite creative. My sisters have both got proper jobs, but when we were growing up, my mum always used to sort of encourage us to make things. My mum's quite a good seamstress and she's a passionate knitter. She'll always say that she's not creative, she just follows instructions, but I disagree. Yeah, I've sort of been known as the arty one for a while. In middle school, I won the Creative Shield in year 6, and that sort of started me down a path in a way to kind of realise that maybe this was what I should be doing, something creative. And yeah, so I sort of carried that on throughout school, and then studied a foundation at Kingston, and then went on to do a furniture and product design degree.
Okay, so when you went to your foundation, you'd had quite a good experience at secondary school, hadn't you?
Yeah.
And I believe that you were interested in fine art and textiles, maybe going forward in graphic design because that's what you'd had experience of. So what changed at foundation that led you then to go do furniture design?
I think it was just the opportunity, really. So I just assumed that I would do fashion or graphics or fine art, like you say, and to get onto a degree course, you had to do a foundation. So it was just kind of, I'll do that to do that. I hadn't really considered that I might change directions. For the point of foundation is to kind of have a go at all of the different disciplines. And it wasn't until I was sort of made to, for want of a better word, to have a look at three-dimensional design that I realised that actually it kind of incorporated a lot of elements from the other disciplines that I liked all into one. So it sort of had the problem solving side for textile design, but it also was more creative and you could be quite conceptual with it. So yeah, it was an unexpected turn when I was in my formative years.
But it's obviously the 3D design is going to become very important, and it's
Yeah.
obviously useful in what you're doing now. Why do you think you chose furniture design?
Again, that was just really having been exposed to it during my foundation. So the course that I did was a very conceptual course. So it wasn't really about so much about making furniture. It was more about the ideas and how people use it. So that, for example, my final projects in my third year, I made a dining table that converted into a desk. I made a set of handbags knitted from plastic carrier bags, and then a more sort of installation hanging mobile piece. So it is a furniture and product design course, but it wasn't so much like design a chair, design a mobile phone. I think it was the course that made me want to do that course, if you see what I mean, because it ticked a lot of the boxes for me, because I wasn't really so interested in getting into too nitty gritty about construction. It was more about the ideas and the design and problem solving that appealed.
Yeah, I can understand. I can see how that would appeal, the actual thinking and coming up with new ideas. Yeah, definitely. And then I'm going to say, what happened then? So after university, you had it all planned out?
No, not so much. As is pretty standard after university, I didn't have a clue what I really wanted to do. And you're not all that employable straight from university, it would turn out. You're kind of led to believe, aren't you, that you go to university to get a job, and then you leave university and it's like, okay. So I got a job just in the local large out of town retailer, dressing window displays and mannequins. Kind of just felt like it wasn't just a shop job, for want of a better expression. I thought it would have at least some creativity in it, and I needed to get a job, so I started there basically. Although I didn't love the job itself, every stage has led on to the next stage essentially. So it exposed me to the world of visual merchandising and retail display, and then I sort of worked my way up slowly over the next sort of 10 years to be working in-house at a high street retailer, designing window displays for their global brand. So sort of every stage really, right from school onwards, in a way, it's sort of, there was never really conscious decisions of where I was trying to get to. It's like, okay, this is the next thing, and then okay, that's led here, which has led here, which has led here. There wasn't really ever a grand plan, and I don't think there is one now either.
Looking back on those steps, then, how does a person go from being in the shop window to then being behind a desk designing shop windows for all the shops?
Well, I guess job dissatisfaction. For not wanting to be too negative, I didn't really enjoy the actual being in store. It wasn't very well paid, so I was kind of just looking for the next step. Yeah, like I say, it was a big out of town shop, but it was just the local one. So I started going for job interviews for regional visual merchandisers and window dressers up in London. And it was during an interview for there, I took along my design portfolio, which might have been quite arrogant, really, in retrospect. And one of the people I went for an interview said, well, have you ever thought about actually designing the windows? To which I said, yeah, but I don't really know where to start. So they gave me some contact details for different design agencies, and I just got in touch with them. And eventually I got a job at one in Wales. So, like I say, it wasn't like I left university knowing I wanted to design window displays. It was just the next step. And yeah, so I worked for that agency. Then we moved back to London, and I worked for a different agency. And then, yeah, like I said, my last proper job was in-house at one of a big brand that shall remain nameless. Um, and it was only really then that I sort of started to think that maybe self-employment might be the way forward.
Okay, so I know you were dabbling in your own creative hobbies during this time. You're busy working in the design industry, which is considered to be a creative industry. Do you think that you perhaps weren't being creatively fulfilled in the day job? And is that why other things were bubbling under?
Yeah, quite possibly. I think, to go back to the last, again, proper job as an example, like, although on paper the, I can't even think what my title was now, it was something that sounded fabulously creative. Really, in reality, it was sort of one day a month coming up with ideas, and the rest of the time was speaking to suppliers, speaking to different markets, getting artworking done. It was all quite, I wouldn't say boring, it's not the right word, but it wasn't creative. And while I do quite like doing some of that to a certain extent, I quite like the methodical nature of it. The ratios were all out of whack for me. Basically, it was just a lot of admin and not a lot of creative. So yeah, I carried on dressmaking, knitting, doing sort of different bits and bobs just as hobbies in the background. And then the catalyst to really becoming self-employed was getting engaged. Pinterest was quite new then, so it was all quite exciting, and it enabled me to kind of pull together a lot of my interests and hobbies into one big ass project of our wedding, basically. So yeah, that kind of gave me the creative outlet that I wasn't so much getting at work.
Yeah, you've mentioned the wedding and you've mentioned bits of knitting and bits of other stuff, but what was it that you actually did for your wedding and why?
So the wedding, it did incorporate lots of crafts, but I would say that there was definitely a skew towards paper craft. And to be honest, mostly for cost reasons. We didn't want to spend loads of money on our wedding. I knew I wanted to make a lot of stuff. So it kind of started there, and I made 120 paper flowers for table centres. I had sort of drops of paper flowers hung across the room instead of bunting, because back then bunting had been done quite a lot, so I wanted something slightly different. I wasn't thinking, oh, I want to design decorations for weddings. It was just, oh, this is a fun project. Let's see what happens. Like, I just crack on, basically, see what happens after the wedding. And I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I kind of focused on paper craft because it's accessible. Like, paper's cheap, paper's easy to get hold of. We used lots of different papers. So I used the papers on the table centres were made from music scores and a Haynes manual, because we're quite nerdy, like technical drawings. So they were all kind of upcycled paper, which made it even more cost effective. And I had done a bit of paper modelling at university, so sort of when I was doing the dining table, for example, I made lots of little maquettes to kind of work out how things would open and things. So it was kind of, again, a marrying of the sort of marrying it's a good pun of the technical background side of, and problem solving with something more creative. So it was kind of putting the two together.
Yeah, I love the idea of the music scores and the Haynes manuals. That makes it completely you, doesn't it? So it's wonderfully personal and it sounds like it's going to look fabulous and be really, really unique. Had you been making flowers before?
No. So I didn't make any. I'd never made a paper flower. So the ones that I made for our wedding weren't designed by me so much. They were just tutorials that I'd found online. I didn't actually design any flowers myself till quite far after the wedding, like a year or so after the wedding, when a wedding planner asked me to make some poppies for a styled shoot. So it's kind of, again, step by step, it's just kind of evolved slowly over time, really.
Yeah. What happened immediately after the wedding?
So when I was setting up, I've always been quite nerdy, so I was quite thorough in my planning and the setup. And then on the day, our wedding photographer was quite gushing about it all and said how amazing it was. And she sort of said, "You should be doing this as a job." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm not good enough." And then she put some sneak peek pictures up on her social media, and one of the big wedding blogger got in touch with her and asked to feature it. So yeah, we got married in August, and then I think it was featured end of September. And sort of in that time, there was a bit of a mad scrabble to get a website going, because I hadn't done our wedding with a view to using it to get work, but suddenly I had that, so I needed to get a website up and going, and like make the most of the opportunity of this blog post. And yeah, off the back of that blog post, I got a couple of orders, and then I got more orders, and then more orders, and then it sort of got to the stage where I was working full time and doing this in the evenings and weekends, and it got to the stage where I just couldn't do both, so I had to take the leap, basically.
Creativityfound.co.uk is the place to go to find workshops, courses, supplies, kits and books to help you get creative. So if you're looking for your own Creativity Found experience, go have a browse to see what's on offer so far. And if you can help adults to find their new creative passion, please get in touch on social media or through the contact details on the website. how did you feel about making that decision? How did you go about physically making that decision and becoming a non-full-time employed person anymore?
It was quite scary because I'd been brought up to sort of value work and being employed, which is obviously no bad thing. So suddenly it felt like I was taking a step away from that. So it was scary. And it took me a couple of weeks to actually pluck the courage up to hand my notice in. I had to keep rewriting and reprinting out my resignation letter. Usually up to that point, if I was resigning from a job, it's because I had another one to go to. But this time I didn't. So it was a bit like, it was terrifying. I also had to give 3 months notice because it was quite a senior role. Because it was so long, I was like, well, another day won't make any difference. It's fine. I'll just put it off another day. So yeah, I'd built up a few contacts in the industry by that point, and I was quite lucky to secure a retainer contract straight out of being full-time employed. So I had a retainer contract which sort of bridged the gap a little bit for me and made it a little bit less scary. That only lasted a year or so, and I've not had another sort of long-term contract like that again. But I've always had enough work, so I think I just needed to almost just do it to prove it to myself that it was possible.
Yeah, no, good for you. It does often take that push to just bite the bullet and go for it. Going back to the proper job, despite them not always being your favourite jobs to do, are there some of the skills or learnings from retail design work that have benefited what you're doing now?
Definitely, definitely. Even like not talking about the freelance work now, which is I basically do very similar work to what I was doing when I was full time employed. But the other side of it, the paper floristry, having the commercial experience, even just things knowing like how to invoice people, how to file things correctly in a business so that you can find things. And I mean, obviously, accounts I didn't learn how to do until I had to do it, but there's a lot of background practicalities of having had a proper job that I can definitely see the value in having done before I became self-employed. Like if I went straight into self-employment from uni, it would have been a disaster, to be honest, because they don't really teach you that stuff. And also just like speaking to suppliers and understanding what formats files need to be in to speak to suppliers and venues and all this kind of stuff. The wedding and now my business, it allows me to sort of apply the skills that I learn in a more creative field. So yeah, definitely. Although I didn't love them at the time, they definitely had value. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. You've been sharing your skills and knowledge now with workshops and your first book, Blooming Paper. How does teaching and sharing compare with making? And how do you balance all of those aspects? So, the actual making and creating, teaching and planning workshops, or for example, doing the work on the book, and whilst also doing your design retainer work.
Yeah. With difficulty. The teaching workshops, I had people sort of say to me for a while, "Oh, you should teach workshops," and I was always a bit cagey. I was like, "I don't want to tell people my secrets." And then I got to the stage where I realised that people who want to learn how to make them are not going to buy them. They're a different market. So I sort of let go of the fear, and I think I taught my first workshop must have been just after Ada was born, and she's 4.5. So it's been 4 years now, and I've kind of evolved the format as I've gone along. So I haven't taught workshops with COVID for a while, and I had another baby at the beginning of the first lockdown. So the workshops have kind of taken a back seat at the moment, but because of that, it's given me the time to do the book and also design these template kits that I now sell. So it's sort of again not no grand plan, just circumstance has meant that okay, I'm not doing workshops. What else can I do? And then the freelance work in the background is just kind of always rumbling away. Basically, I have one or two main clients that I deal with, and I just do a couple of days a week and then fit in everything else around that. The book was that was hardcore to do that. That was a lot of work to fit in. So yeah, I'm quite looking forward to that actually coming out this month now.
Do you have any preferences? What do you like to do? If you could do one thing all the time, what one thing would you choose?
I don't think I could do one thing all the time. I think that's part of my problem. Or maybe that's a skill, I don't know. I think there's aspects, or I kind of enjoy all the aspects depending on what mood I'm in, if you see what I mean. If I had a new couple for a wedding, going through the concept design with them and finalising ideas is really satisfying. Then making the things that we've designed is satisfying, and then seeing it on the day is great as well. So I there isn't really any element that I hate or love above anything else. I quite like the monotony of sitting there and folding hundreds of paper flowers sometimes. And then sometimes that's the last thing I want to do. So I think there's pros and cons to all kind of stages of projects, really.
Yeah, I completely understand. That was a mean question from me. Do you have specific papers or techniques that you always use? And tell me a bit about how you've learned the techniques and how you've learned to design your own concepts.
Yeah, so the from a sort of technical point of view of the paper engineering of paper flowers, I'm self-taught, so just from experimentation. So, like I say, that first request for poppies, I just looked at lots of pictures of poppies on Pinterest and kind of sketched out petal shapes, cut them out, and sort of experimented to see if I fold it like that, what shape does it make? So it was all very experimental. And I still, if I'm designing a new flower now, I still use that technique. So whereas if I'm making 100 flowers, I obviously don't hand cut all the petals. I've got a plotter that I cut everything out on. But if I'm designing a new flower, I'm much more likely to use scissors and hand techniques to kind of experiment to get things right. I design everything in Illustrator, which again is another thing that I wasn't taught at university. That was something I learned on the job doing retail display design. So again, it sort of swings back there. I've experimented with lots of different bits and bobs. My preferred tools are knitting needles. Again, probably because what I had on hand, but they're quite good because they come in so many gauges. If you're making a big flower, you can use a nice big 10mm needle. If you're making a little one, you can use a little 2mm needle. So I use those for a lot of the forming. It's all sort of self-taught and experimental. And there is actually, without wanting to sound like a salesperson, there's a chapter in my new book that goes through how to design your own flowers. There's one example that uses a vintage illustration of a flower where you can kind of trace shapes from the petals of that illustration and then experiment with how they would be formed. And then there's another example where I've actually taken a garden rose and taken it apart, like ripped the petals off, which felt a bit mean at the time, and then used the actual physical petals of a real flower to get the shapes for paper petals to then recreate it in paper. And then obviously the more I make, the more I learn. So the less experimentation there is, and the more deliberate design decisions there are. As far as papers, I tend to just use a mixture of everything really. The only real caveat to that is if you were making a really massive flower, it's better to use something slightly heavier weight, and if you're making something really tiny, it's better to use something very lightweight. But I tend to be drawn more to colour and texture to add different feelings and textures to the final displays than I'm drawn to everything must be 300 GSM sort of thing. So yeah, I kind of take papers from different companies, different finishes, and mix it all together basically.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the design chapter in your book, which sounds really, really useful. What else can people expect to find in the book?
That's a very good question, Claire. So there, yeah, like I say, there's a chapter about how to design flowers. Then there's a chapter about techniques, so different ways of curling petals and folding petals, and then different ways of attaching petals to stems. Then there are tutorials for, I forget how many, I'm going to say between 10 and 15 different flowers that sort of take the techniques from the techniques chapter and apply them to flowers. When I teach workshops, we go through two flowers together, and then people get a chance to apply the techniques to make up their own flowers. And that's sort of what this chapter enables you to see, how using the same techniques but just altering them slightly can give you a completely different flower. So for example, one of the main ways to make a petal from flat to 3D is to give it what I call a dart, because I'm from a sewing background. So if you did a long dart, you'll end up with a shallow petal, and if you do a short dart, you end up with a steep one. So you can end up with a completely different flower just by altering something tiny, which is why my mantra is always, it's not wrong, it's different, because you can't actually do it wrong. It just it'll just be different. But like, isn't that what nature's like? It's so you can't. There's no right or wrong answer, and that's kind of what I like about the craft. Anyone can do it, and you can't do it wrong. So yeah, you go through how to make. There's a poppy, two different types of roses, the daffodil. There's some lily of the valley, lots of different flowers. Anyway, so yeah, after the tutorials on the individual flowers, there are 7 guided projects that you can make. So there's a bouquet, a table arrangement, a wreath, that kind of thing, that you can then use the flowers from the individual flower chapters and use them in projects. And then the final chapter sort of shows you how you might apply them to larger scale installation, so something more similar to the commercial side of design that I do. So there's a window display that I designed for a local cafe that was designed specifically for the book. So you can kind of see from the initial drawings to the design work to the manufacture and then the installation. That's it in a large nutshell.
It does sound like it's got everything in it. And as an editor of such books, you sound like you must have been a very good author.
I'm quite thorough and quite nerdy, so I think I did okay.
You've done all the experimenting for other people, as you've already mentioned, and now you supply kits. Tell me a bit more about those.
Yeah, so they're not kits in the traditional sense of, like, I don't cut out all the petals for you and tell you you need to make this. They've actually arisen from a need again. It was a sort of a step by step thing that led to producing them. It was when I first started doing workshops, I did used to cut all the petals out beforehand, but then it took so much time, and then by the time I got to the workshops, I just wasn't, to be brutally honest, I wasn't earning enough to make it worth my while. So I started to think about ways to cut out some of the prep work. So I designed and manufactured a little acrylic template kits. There's a set of different petal shapes and base shapes, and they're all strung together on a ribbon. So for my workshops, I hand one out to each attendee, and then I say, right, we need to draw 6 of petal 1 and then 3 of petal 2. So you'd never do that because I don't know what flower that would make. But anyway, and then people at the workshop started saying, oh, can we buy these? And I was like, no, because it was something I had just made 10 sets to take for workshops, sort of thing. So then I was like, right, okay, I need to work out how to do this. So I got a load made, and people would buy them after the workshop, and I was like, right, I should probably be doing more with this. There seems to be a demand. So I started designing little instruction booklets to be able to sell them online to people who hadn't been to the workshop. As an isolated object, they're sort of meaningless, but if you've got instructions or you've been to a workshop and you've been taught how to use them, then you can see why people might want them. So yeah, then I started to sell them on Etsy last year after making these little designs, these little illustrative booklets. So that was kind of, again, another precursor to the book in a way. Because when I make flowers, I'm like, oh, well, that goes like that, and then you tweak that a bit and it goes like that. Whereas I had to actually sit down and be like, right, okay, you've got to think about someone who's never done this before, and you've got the shapes all had to be refined to make sure that the overlaps would have worked, blah blah blah. So you get the set of templates, and then there's a little wooden stick for a curling tool in there, and like I say, these little booklets, which are sort of like a mini book. I think I undersell them, I call them leaflets, but there's one which teaches you how to make stem bases to be able to put stems on your flowers. Then there's one booklet that goes through the different techniques of how you can form the petals to be able to make up your own flower. So I don't go through a specific flower. And then there's another booklet which gives you guidance on how to design your own flower. The need forced me to do stuff, as is tends to be the way.
It is the way for lots of people. From someone who initially didn't want to share their secrets, you've now got workshops, the book, templates. You've got so many ways for people to learn this technique from you.
And I think I probably do that more now than actually designing and making for people, which kind of suits my life stage now. Like I said, I've got 2 kids. Stanley's 18 months ish, and Ada's just started school. So like life's chaotic. So there's the days have gone where I used to be able to do 17-hour days. You just can't. So it's sort of again evolved out of need because I can't be working 17-hour days anymore.
You're also enabling people to keep going at this craft once they've started, whether it is on a workshop or straight from a book. You're helping them to keep growing and developing themselves as well, which is fabulous.
Yeah, that's the thing I like about doing workshops. Like I always get a bit nervous straight before, which sounds really silly, but I'm always like, oh, what if everyone hates it? What if they've come and they've paid this money and they think I'm rubbish? But that's never happened. I've taught quite a few now, and they always go quite well. But like everyone at the end leaves with at least 3 flowers. So we go through the 2 that we make together and then one more at least. But most people leave with sort of 5 or 6, and they're all completely different. And that's what I really like, is that we all come together, make 2 together, and then everyone just chats. And I'm on hand to kind of help, obviously. But everyone has learned enough, like you say, to carry on. And then design their own bits and pieces. So yeah, having then being able to send the book or the kits to people who can't come to workshops or who want to continue on when they get home, it's worked out nicely.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think it's fabulous. How can people connect with you, Laura?
So I'm on Instagram under Laura Reed Design, and then my website is laurareeddesign.co.uk. Instagram is where I'm probably the most prolifically up to date, but then there's also my website.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Claire.
Creativity Found is an Open Stage Arts production. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, rate and review. If you would like to contribute to future episodes, visit ko-fi.com/creativityfoundpodcast. If you contact any of the artists featured, sign up to their workshops or buy their products, don't forget to mention Creativity Found Podcast. On Instagram or Facebook, follow @Creativity Found Podcast, where you'll find photos of our contributors' artwork and be kept abreast of everything we're up to.